At my father's funeral, surrounded by hundreds of relatives, friends, and business partners, the family lawyer read out a will I had never seen before. The contents? Unless I agreed to give 90% of my income to my older brother for the next 15 years, I would lose my entire inheritance from my mother. And right then, I didn't get angry. I laughed, because what they didn't know was that my mother saw this coming, and she left behind a weapon they could never imagine. My name is Ethan Caldwell, and if there's one thing I've learned from my family, it's this. Sometimes to survive, you don't need to shout. You just need to know exactly when to strike. The funeral was held at a small church on the south side of Austin, Texas. It was lightly raining, and the scent of lilies filled the aisles. More people showed up than I expected, not out of grief, but curiosity. My father, Russell Caldwell, was a well-known figure in the local business community. Chairman of Caldwell & Sons, a long-standing supplier of construction equipment. The eulogy ended. People began to gather their things to leave when Richard Keene, my father's longtime attorney, stepped forward holding a thick envelope. He cleared his throat, unfolded the papers, and began reading. As per the final wishes of Mr. Russell Caldwell, this will goes into effect immediately and shall be made public to all present. I was just about to stand up and walk away until I heard this. Ethan Caldwell shall receive no portion of Rebecca Caldwell's estate unless and only if he agrees to sign a contract committing 90% of his net annual income to his elder brother, Jacob Caldwell, for no fewer than 15 years. The room went dead silent. A spoon dropped somewhere on the tiled floor. My eyes shifted to Jacob. He was leaning back, arms crossed, wearing a smug grin. This wasn't a surprise. It was a setup. But I knew. I wasn't the prey. Because someone else, someone long gone, had already seen this moment coming. And she left me with something neither Jacob nor Richard Keene could ever anticipate. I didn't say a word. No outburst, no arguing, no storming up to snatch the will from anyone's hands. I just sat there, eyes fixed on my father's signature at the bottom of each page. What I felt wasn't shock. I'd long since trained myself not to be surprised by anything my father or Jacob did. No, what I felt was something colder, sharper, quiet like steel. The feeling you get when you know a fight is coming, and this time you're ready for it. I turned my head and quietly walked out of the church just as the whispers started spreading. Everyone watched me. Not out of support, but anticipation. They wanted to see what the ungrateful son would do next. In their eyes, Jacob was the golden child, the heir, the loyal son, the one who sacrificed for the family. And me? I was the traitor. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas, in a big house with a white fence, a wide front lawn, and 3 generations under one roof. The Caldwells were seen as pillars of the neighborhood. Everybody knew our name. But behind the picture-perfect image was a rigid system of control, roles, and expectations, and my father sat at the very center of it. From a young age, I was different. I didn't like hammers. I hated the warehouse. The smell of lumber and machine oil made me nauseous. I preferred to sit alone and draw imaginary city maps, solve logic puzzles, and read books on economics. While Jacob rode shotgun with my dad on weekend supply runs, I taught myself to code and made my first money selling scripts on online forums at 14. My father never hid his disappointment. "That crap's not gonna feed a family," he'd mutter whenever he saw me hunched over a keyboard. Jacob was the opposite. He struggled in school, never had an original idea, but he knew exactly how to earn Dad's approval. He got praised for being a hard worker, even when that just meant hauling boxes or fixing shelves. I remember one Thanksgiving dinner. I proudly announced I'd landed an internship with a major financial firm in New York. Dad gave me a cold nod. 5 minutes later, Jacob said he'd just helped install new racking systems in the warehouse. Dad stood up, poured himself a drink, and raised his glass. "That's real work, Jacob. I'm proud of you." When my mother died from a stroke 8 years ago, things only got worse. She was the only one who ever stood between me and Dad's dominance. After she passed, it wasn't just a loss. It was a vacuum. Power collapsed entirely into one direction, and I was pushed completely out. In the newest family photo hanging in the company lobby, I'm not even in it. Dad never asked how I was doing in New York. Never once wondered if I needed help, but I knew Jacob still received monthly stipends from the company, and even got a lump sum advance 3 years ago to buy a new house. At that time, I was juggling 3 jobs just to pay off my MBA loans, and now, after everything, they expect me to buy back my inheritance with my own sweat and blood. They call it a family obligation. I call it the final blow in a long line of emotional manipulation dressed up as love. There was a time when I considered walking away from it all, but then I saw Jacob's smug grin at the funeral. The way his eyes gleamed like the world was already his. And in that moment, I knew, if I stayed silent this time, they wouldn't just steal what was mine. They'd bury the truth along with my father's body. And I wasn't going to let that happen. 3 days after the funeral, I received an email from Richard Keene, our family lawyer. Subject line: legal confirmation, final will and testament of Russell Caldwell. Attached was a scanned document nearly 20 pages long, along with a handwritten letter supposedly penned by my father himself. Company letterhead. That same sharp-angled handwriting he'd used to sign contracts for decades. But something felt off. I read every line, and a chill like ice crawled down my spine. The will stated that my father's entire estate, the mansion, his shares in the company, and all investments previously in my mother's name, would be transferred fully to Jacob, unless I agreed to 2 conditions. I had to give 90% of my annual net income, including salary, bonuses, dividends, and any side income, to the Caldwell Family Operating Fund. I had to sign a binding agreement renouncing all involvement in any business decisions at Caldwell & Sons, including voting rights on the board. In other words, if I didn't surrender completely, they would erase me from the family's legacy. I had never been invited to discuss the will. No one asked for my input. There was no meeting with the lawyer. No draft for review. Just a preset trap, signed, sealed, and ready for me to fall into. That night, I drove to my father's house. The mansion in Westlake was still lit up like he'd never died. When I rang the bell, Jacob answered, wine glass in hand, wearing that signature look of smug amusement. "Well, Ethan, I figured you'd be too busy checking your bank account. I didn't reply. I stepped inside, letting my eyes wander through the house. The paintings, the bookshelves, all the things that once belonged to my mother were still there. But on paper, it was all his now. "You think this is a game?" I asked, my voice calm, level. Jacob shrugged, then sank into Dad's old leather chair, the one he only used when signing major contracts. "Not a game. A process, a continuation, and a consequence," he said, sugar sweet, like poison stirred into honey. "A consequence?" I raised an eyebrow. "Dad gave you every chance to come back. You chose to walk away. Now you pay to return. You can still have your mother's share if you step down from your little throne in New York." I looked around that room, the air thick with manipulation and rot. I was going to leave in silence. But then my eyes landed on the piano, the one my mother used to play. It was covered in dust. I turned back. "I'm not signing, and I'm not paying, but someone prepared for this day, long before Dad died, and you're not going to like it." Jacob's eyes flickered. He stood up slowly, tilted his head. "What are you talking about?" I walked to the door, placing my hand on the cold brass knob. "You'll find out soon enough." And I slammed the door shut behind me, not to escape, but to prepare for war. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no radio. Nothing but the low hum of the engine against the quiet Texas night. Jacob's words kept looping in my head. "You pay to come back." They thought I had only two options: bow down or disappear. But my mother once told me something. On the day she realized she didn't have much time left. "If you ever find yourself cornered, Ethan, go to the one person I trust most." Back then, I thought she meant it metaphorically. Now I knew. She had left me a key. The person she was talking about was Mrs. Eleanor Park, our former neighbor in Deerwood. A Korean woman in her 70s, once a high school literature teacher, living alone in a cottage near the lake. When I was a kid, she used to bring gingerbread cookies to our house every Christmas. I hadn't seen her since my mother passed. But when I rang her doorbell that Saturday morning, she opened it instantly, as if she'd been expecting me. "You're here," she said. No surprise, no questions. The house looked just like I remembered. The scent of jasmine tea, walls lined with books and black and white photos by the fireplace. She invited me in and disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later she returned, holding an old mahogany box with a tarnished brass lock. "3 weeks before your mother died," she began slowly, "she brought this to me and said, 'Give it to Ethan only if things go too far.'" I took the box in silence. Inside was a large envelope, sealed in red wax. My mother's handwriting, soft, familiar, was on the front. "For Ethan, if fairness no longer exists in this family." I broke the seal. Inside was a stack of legal documents, over 40 pages thick, and a handwritten letter, nearly 3 pages long. That was the first time I saw the words, "The Eden Clause, a protective provision against financial exploitation within the Caldwell family." A separate trust fund, a 3-party oversight system, an automated trigger designed to activate if coercive financial control was detected within the family. And me, per the signature and notarized date, I was named as a co-executor alongside an independent witness, Mrs. Park. I sat there in her living room, my mother's letter unfolded across my lap like a map to something long buried. "My dear son," she wrote, "I hoped you'd never have to use what I left behind, but if you're reading this, then I was right. Your father's greed has outgrown his love. Use this, not for revenge, but to protect what you deserve." I looked up at Mrs. Park. She nodded slowly, her eyes sad but resolute. "It's time now, Ethan," she said. "You have to decide whether to stay silent or break the cycle of being forgotten." I clenched the documents in my hands. My chest was tight, like a firework being packed too tightly inside. There was no doubt anymore. The game had started, and this time, I held the ace. That night, I spread out everything my mother left me across the kitchen table. Her handwritten letter lay in the center, surrounded by bank statements, Eden trust clauses, and one detail that nearly knocked the breath out of me. Proof that my mother had opened a private college fund for me when I was 12. That account, I remembered hearing her mention it once. It was after I won the state scholarship for the math competition in 10th grade. She'd ruffled my hair, smiled, and said, "If the scholarship isn't enough, I've got a little savings just for you. Don't worry about money. Just study your heart out." I believed her, but then she died, and the account vanished. I never asked about it, partly because I was afraid of the answer, mostly because my father had already explained it to me, coldly, when I turned 18. "The market crashed. Your college fund's gone. Figure it out." I remember the exact day he said that. It was the same day I came home with my acceptance letter from Wharton, a full-ride scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania. I walked in, heart pounding with excitement, only to find my dad standing next to our dented Ford, the rear end smashed in. Jacob, 20 years old at the time, stood nearby, head down, crumpling an accident report. "Didn't see the light pole," he mumbled. "It just showed up." My dad sighed, then turned to me. I held up my scholarship letter, nearly shouting, "Dad, I got in, full ride, 4 years and everything's covered." He barely glanced at it, furrowed his brow, then waved his hand. "Good, smart kid. Now go grab the big flashlight from the garage. Let's see if we can fix the damn car." I stood there, frozen. My acceptance letter, still unread, brushed aside like a flyer someone hands you on the street. That night, I spent 2 hours holding the flashlight while Dad and Jacob hammered out the dent. As they joked and discussed paint jobs, my letter slipped from my hand, falling onto the oily ground between old rags and dirt. And now, holding the account printout with my mother's name on it, everything snapped into place. The entire fund had been drained a few weeks after the accident. The name on the withdrawal? My father. Reason listed, property improvement, family assets. Not a single dollar went to me. Every cent, as shown in the transfer record, was used as a down payment on a house for Jacob. I sat there, fists clenched around the warped sheet of paper, not because of the money, but because of how they used my achievements as the perfect excuse to steal what was mine, then bury the hope that came with it. I used to think I started from zero, but I didn't. I started from a negative balance they created for me. They didn't just leave me behind, they robbed me and made me carry the weight of what they'd done. And the worst part? I accepted it. I swallowed that pain for years, thinking it was just my place in this family. But now, with every word my mother wrote, every breadcrumb she left behind, I know one thing. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't too sensitive. I was right all along, and I'm not letting them write the rest of my story. I knew the moment I chose not to stay silent, the first response from my family wouldn't be guilt. It would be an attack. What I didn't expect was how fast it would come, and how ruthless. The first blow landed at 7:18 a.m. the very next morning. My phone rang. Jacob. I let it ring 4 times before picking up. "Ethan," he began, with that fake concerned tone he'd perfected. "Do you have a moment to talk? Just 2 grown men, calmly." I said nothing. Silence. He kept going, voice dipped in pity. "I know you're still upset. But what's in the will wasn't meant to pressure you. It's an opportunity for us to rebuild what was lost, to preserve Dad's legacy together." I scoffed. "By stripping me of financial autonomy, that's what you call unity?" He sighed. "You're overreacting. Dad gave everything for that business. I stood by him every day for the last 10 years. And you vanished. Now, when the family needs unity, you're the one causing division. Do you even realize how the relatives are looking at you right now?" His voice sharpened, colder now. "Don't think that just because you've got some title and a bit of money, you're above everyone else. Everything you have came from this family. If Mom were here, she'd be heartbroken to see you turn your back like this." I cut in, voice flat as stone. "You don't get to talk about Mom." Then I hung up. Not even 30 minutes later, the second strike hit. I was making coffee when an internal email popped up. Subject line: "Urgent meeting with Managing Director, 11 Hunkwick a.m. today." From Gregory Linton, my direct supervisor. A tough but fair man, and the one pushing my name for partner next year. I knew something was off. At exactly 11 Hunkwick, I walked into his office. Gregory's face was tight. He held a printed email in a manila folder. "Ethan," he said bluntly, "I received 2 calls last night, one from your brother, one from your family lawyer." I sat down. The back of my neck burned. "They're alleging signs of emotional instability," he said, "claiming you've displayed what they called financial extremism. They're questioning whether you can handle stress. They even implied you might misuse fiduciary power if you're promoted to partner." He paused, eyes locking onto mine. "Ethan, they're trying to ruin your reputation. I want to hear the truth from you." I inhaled slowly, keeping my breath steady. "Mr. Linton," I said, pulling a folder from my briefcase, "this isn't just a family dispute. It's an organized attempt at coercion, and I'm handling it, legally and professionally." I handed him a copy of the Eden Clause documentation, along with the evidence my mother had prepared. Gregory read through the pages. his expression gradually softening. "All right," he said with a slow nod. "I'm not one to be swayed by a couple of anonymous calls, but I need you calm. And I need you to play this clean." "Yes, sir," I nodded. "I'm not seeking revenge. I'm seeking justice." I thought that would be the end of it, but that evening the third wave came. A call from Aunt Monica, the self-proclaimed moral pillar of the family. "Ethan, sweetheart," she began, voice syrupy sweet. "My heart aches over all this. Your father hasn't been gone long, and already the family is in chaos." I opened my mouth, but she didn't let me speak. "Jacob is falling apart. I've never seen him like this. He says you're threatening the company, upsetting your boss. Ethan, is it worth it? Please, think of your father's health, even if he's no longer with us." My reply was calm, but solid as steel. "Aunt Monica, this family's been pretending for far too long. I'm done being the one who carries the burden for everyone else's mistakes." Her tone shifted, quieter, more pleading. "You're the most successful one among us. Shouldn't that mean you're the one who sacrifices the most? That's just how family works, Ethan." I paused, then answered softly but firmly. "If being family means using one person's success to excuse everyone else's weakness, then I no longer want to live by that rule." I hung up, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them anymore. After that last call with Aunt Monica, I knew it was time to stop talking to anyone in the family, because they weren't coming to talk. They were coming to destroy me, with pressure, with guilt, with carefully disguised shame wrapped in the language of love. But now, I had something they never expected. A strategy crafted by the one woman they spent their whole lives underestimating. My mother wasn't just gentle. She was a strategist. The next morning, I had an appointment at the law office of Diana Briggs, one of the top litigators in complex estate disputes in Boston. I flew out from Texas overnight, barely caught 3 hours of sleep on the plane, then waited in a lobby that reeked of power. Thick carpets, walnut-paneled walls, coffee served in real porcelain. Diana walked into the conference room precisely on time. Early 50s, silver hair tied backy, eyes like X-rays that read through me in seconds. She sat across from me, opened her laptop, and got straight to the point. "You've got 30 minutes. Convince me why I should take this case." I placed a full printed dossier on the table. The Eden Trust documents, my father's will, and the withdrawn college fund statements. Then I told the story. Not emotionally, but methodically, as if I were pitching to a panel of investors, a summary of the family history. What my mother had left behind. The exploitative economic system masquerading as kinship, the collusion between Jacob and Richard Keene. And finally, I read aloud the poison clause from the Eden Trust. In the event of financial coercion between blood relatives, full operating authority of the trust shall transfer to a board consisting of the harmed party, a supervising attorney, and one civilian witness, pre-designated by the founder. Diana didn't say a word for 10 minutes. She just read. Each time she flipped a page, the sound of paper slicing through silence felt like a scalpel against flesh. At last, she looked up and gave a subtle nod. "This Eden Trust," she said, "is one of the most brilliant financial safeguard systems I've ever seen. And your mother, if you'll allow me to be frank, wasn't just a good parent. She was a legacy architect. I clenched my hands under the table, keeping my voice steady. So, do we have a chance? Diana tilted her head slightly, and her eyes turned razor sharp. Not just a chance. We have the upper hand. They won't see it coming, and I'll be damned if I let someone like Richard Keene outmaneuver me. She stood, gathered the documents. First step, she said, we get full visibility on their financial weaknesses. I want company ledgers, loan contracts, every transfer of ownership over the past 10 years. If there's a crack in their foundation, we'll find it. She paused at the door, looking straight at me. Ethan, this is no longer a family matter. This is a takeover, and you are holding the controlling interest. That night, I spent nearly 10 hours in front of my computer. I began combing through every public record tied to Caldwell & Sons, loan disclosures from local banks, court filings on minor supplier disputes, and then I found it. A second mortgage, in my father's name. $400,000, taken out 3 years ago, right around the time Jacob bought his new home. Guarantor, the company. Purpose listed, retail expansion reinvestment. But there were no receipts, no renovations, no projects ever completed. The funds, in truth, were used to cover Jacob's $150,000 credit card debt, a lavish wedding, and a brand new pickup truck. My father had siphoned company money, assets my mother co-owned, to fund the failings of the son he saw as heir. I typed my final note into the investigative file. Their mistake was thinking I'd stay on the sidelines forever. Now, I was sitting at the center of the board, and I was the one making the next move. 3 days later, we sent out the first letter. Not a warning. A formal summons triggered under the activation clause of the Eden Trust, requesting the attendance of all relevant parties for an official review of trust management, to be held at the main office of Briggs & Parker, 38th floor, Franklin Tower, Boston. The word request was just a formality. Legally, it was binding, and failure to attend would be considered default agreement to the terms presented. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my hotel suite, watching the city lights blink across the skyline. On the table in front of me were 3 folders. The financial records of Caldwell & Sons, proving the company was facing a severe liquidity crisis. The personal spending reports, showing unauthorized transfers from company accounts to Jacob's personal expenses. Illegal, documented, unmistakable, and finally, the signed designation from my mother, authorizing a 3-person board to make binding decisions in cases of financial coercion. The board consisted of myself, Ethan Caldwell, as the financially threatened party, attorney Diana Briggs, legal representative of the Eden Trust, and the third, Mr. Bill Archer, my former high school math teacher, a close family friend, and the civilian witness my mother had appointed 8 years ago. I still remembered what he told me the day I won the state math scholarship. Some kids are born into debts they never signed. Their job is to rewrite the invoice. Now, he was helping me rewrite the biggest invoice of my life. The morning of the hearing, I walked into the glass tower like a man with nothing left to lose, but holding the final ace in the deck. The 38th floor conference room felt like a world apart. tempered glass walls, a polished black stone table, and white light so clean it cut through skin. Every footstep echoed like a verdict. Across the table, Jacob arrived alone. No attorney, no assistant, just that familiar smirk of confidence, because he didn't believe I'd go through with it. "You're really gonna do this?" he sneered. I didn't answer. I simply placed a black binder on the table, opened it, and arranged the documents in order. Financial withdrawals, fraudulent transactions, and finally, our mother's signed directive. Diana spoke once, clearly. "This hearing begins at 10 o'clock. Sharp. All necessary documentation has been prepared. Please take your seats." Jacob opened his mouth, but Mr. Archer cut him off with a single, piercing glance. "Jacob," he said, "today isn't about family talk. Today is about the truth." I looked up at the oversized wall clock. The second hand landed on 10 o'clock. There was no turning back. From that moment on, every word, every page, every fact would be part of the legal record. I closed the binder, sat tall, eyes forward. I was no longer the forgotten son in the family portrait. I was the one rewriting the Caldwell legacy. The conference room was silent, still as a stone cathedral. No one smiled. No one acted like this was a family matter anymore. Because today, we weren't here to talk about love. We were here to talk about justice. I was the first to speak, not with blame, but with facts, dates, and numbers. June 18, 2011. I received a full-ride scholarship to Wharton. June 22nd. A college investment account under my mother's name was drained. Total, nearly $72,000. Authorized by Russell Caldwell, my father. Stated purpose, warehouse number 2 renovations. I opened a photo of the wire transfer, clean, indisputable, and slid it across the table to Jacob. He frowned, ready to protest, but I didn't pause. Warehouse number 2 was never renovated, but the very next day, a down payment was made, from that same account, for a house purchased by Jacob Caldwell. The house you live in today. My mother paid for it, with the future of my education. I turned toward Mr. Archer and Diana. "That's not support. That's inheritance theft." Jacob shot up from his chair. "You're twisting things. Dad did it to help the whole family. Mom would have hated all this legal crap." Diana calmly placed a sealed document in front of him. "This is the original Eden Clause agreement, signed by Rebecca Caldwell on July 3, 2015, 6 months before her death. She was present, mentally sound, and witnessed by Eleanor Park and Bill Archer, both present in this room." Mr. Archer spoke next, voice raspy but firm. "Your mother cried when she signed it. She said clearly, 'I don't trust my husband to keep his promises, and I fear that one day Ethan will be sacrificed to protect Jacob's pride.'" No one spoke. There was nothing left to defend. Jacob slowly sank back into his seat, face pale. Diana continued. "According to Section 6.2 of the Eden Clause, if financial exploitation is confirmed through evidence, full authority over the trust shall immediately transfer to the 3-person board. including the exploited party. She looked at me, gave a small nod. That authority now belongs to you, Ethan. I took a deep breath, not from joy, but from the weight of power placed where it finally belonged. Jacob's voice trembled as he whispered, "So what now? You're cutting me out, leaving me with nothing?" I answered, each word like a blade. "No, I'm not you. This isn't revenge. But I won't keep feeding injustice either." Then I laid down the 3 terms. The Eden Trust will buy out all shared assets, including my parents' home, to prevent any forced liquidation. Jacob is stripped of all voting rights in the company. If he wants a chance to redeem himself, he can join a restructuring program, starting from the ground up, just like every other employee. Jacob didn't reply, but I could tell. He understood. The era of entitlement was over. When the hearing ended, no one shook hands. No one said congratulations. We simply stood, each of us walking away with a different ending. I walked away with the truth. Jacob walked away with the consequences. And my mother, she left behind a system designed to protect me, even when she could no longer stand beside me. 11 days after the hearing, I was in the kitchen brewing a cup of tea when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Ethan, it's me. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but everything's falling apart. I need to talk. Please." I stared at the screen for a long moment, not because I was conflicted, but because I was waiting to see if I was still angry enough to say no. Sarah, my girlfriend, walked in, glanced at the message. She didn't say a word, just placed a hand gently on my shoulder and nodded. "Not because he deserves it, but because you need to finish your story." We agreed to meet in the same conference room where everything once shattered. Jacob showed up looking different. No suit, no smirk. His face was thinner, eyes sunken with exhaustion. One hand loosely held a worn-out baseball cap, the other trembled slightly. He sat down without meeting my eyes. "It's all gone," he said quietly. "The house is being foreclosed. Rachel took the kids to her parents. She told me not to come back until I learn how to be a man." I said nothing. Let him speak. "I never thought I'd be in a place where I'd have to ask you for anything, but now I get it, Ethan. That family I thought I was preserving all these years was really a rotting warehouse, and I was the one pouring gasoline on it." I sat across from him, steady. In my hand was a folder, prepared by Attorney Briggs. "I'm not here to blame you, Jacob," I said. "I'm here to offer you a choice, one last chance." I slid the folder across the table. "This is a full restructuring plan for Caldwell & Sons. The Eden Trust will pay off all outstanding debts, from suppliers to the bank. The store will be bought out, renovated, and relaunched as a new business, Caldwell Hardware Solutions, and you'll have a shot to start again." Jacob looked up, eyes narrowing in disbelief. "You mean I get to come back?" "As an employee," I clarified. "Not as a director, no shares, no authority." Then I listed the terms. He'd be given a branch manager position under direct supervision of the 3-person board, required to complete a small business management course at Boston Community College. performance reviews every quarter, failure to meet standards, extermination, no stipend, no privileges, no family perks. Jacob stared at the paperwork, then at me, as if waiting for the punchline. I said only one thing. This isn't my father forgiving you. This is my mother giving you one last chance. Through me. He was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. Slowly, like a man relearning how to breathe. I'll do it, he said. Not to get back what I lost, but to finally create something that's actually mine. I stood up and extended my hand. Jacob hesitated for a second, then took it. And for the first time in our lives, that handshake carried no weight of privilege, only the raw truth. A broken man, finally willing to rebuild, if he has the courage to start from zero. 3 months after Jacob signed the reconstruction agreement, I got a call from Gregory, my direct supervisor in New York. He didn't bother with pleasantries. Ethan, pack your bags. Next week you're leading the acquisition team for Everline Retail in Chicago. I froze for a moment. Everline was the biggest deal in the past 5 years. A $400 million acquisition, the kind of operation only senior partners even dreamed of touching. I replied slowly, I thought you were leading that one, Gregory. He let out a loud laugh over the line, sounding like he was raising a glass. I had lunch today with Edward Hayes, CEO of Everline. He told me something I won't forget. I want to work with someone who can manage a family crisis the same way they'd handle a corporate merger. No emotion, no retreat, and no grudges guiding the wheel. I asked who told him the story. He said, his cousin, the lawyer for your family's bank. I laughed. My story had traveled in ways I could have never predicted. Gregory continued, voice quieter now. Ethan, I used to think you were just an exceptional analyst, but today, I know you're a leader. He paused, just for a beat, then said, Congratulations. The board voted this morning. You've officially been promoted, the youngest partner in the firm's history. I said nothing. I just stood there, phone in hand, staring out the window of my apartment, where the city lights rose like 1,000 tiny flames burning quietly in my chest. That victory wasn't about beating someone. It was about not losing myself when everything tried to push me past the edge. I didn't become them, even when I had every reason to. 1 week later, at the first official meeting of the restructured Eden Trust Board, I signed the deed to transfer my mother's old house to the trust, to be transformed into a free vocational training center for underprivileged youth in the Austin area. I didn't need to keep the house to remind myself of what was lost. I wanted it to become a place that offered what was once taken from me, a real chance to begin the right way. A few days later, after staying late at the office, I found an envelope on my desk. No name, just one typed sentence. You protected your mother's true legacy by refusing to stain it with revenge. I hope someday I'll work under your leadership, JC. I folded the letter and slipped it into my wallet. Not because it changed everything, but because it confirmed one simple truth. I was no longer walking alone. 6 months later, I stood in the backyard of our new home on the outskirts of Cambridge. Early autumn. Leaves were just beginning to turn, and soft gusts of wind brushed through the garden where Sarah was setting the table. Today was our engagement celebration. No grand party, no fireworks, no high-profile guests. Just a small gathering, enough people, enough warmth. To the left, close friends from college. To the right, employees from Aldwell Hardware, people Jacob now manages under the banner of earned value. Jacob arrived a little late, with his wife and 2 kids in tow. He wasn't overdressed, but he walked with purpose. For the first time, his eyes didn't flinch when they met mine. He shook my hand. No long speech, no apology needed, because he was learning to repay what was right through action. And that was enough. Later, as guests mingled across the garden, Mrs. Eleanor Park approached me. She handed me a small wooden box, neatly tied with silver silk ribbon. "Your mother left this for you," she said, eyes misty. "She told me to give it to you when you found a love that didn't need masks or hiding." I opened it. Inside was a simple platinum wedding band, the same one my mother wore through 32 years of marriage. No gemstones, no engravings on the outside, just one line etched inside: choice, not obligation. I looked over at Sarah, laughing with friends, wine glass in hand, her smile still as radiant as the day I met her at the hospital fundraiser. And in that moment, I understood. I hadn't used my mother's legacy to get revenge. I used it to build a life she once dreamed I'd have. No longer part of a chain of inherited burdens. No longer the shadow of a father, or the placeholder for a brother's second chances. I was finally just me. If you ask me what the greatest lesson was after everything I've been through, I'd say this: family isn't where you sacrifice yourself just to belong. True family is where you're allowed to grow, to be different and still be loved. And if that place doesn't exist, you have the right to stop and build it yourself. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is cut ties with a toxic legacy and start writing a new one with your own 2 hands. Because we weren't born to repay each other's debts. We were born to find our own path. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever fought a silent war within your own family, I invite you to share. Because somewhere out there, someone may need the courage that only you can give.